So the best way to visualize the data in a correlation is to create a scatter plot, which we use for plotting correlational data. A scatter plot is a picture, and it shows us the relationship between two variables. It's called a scatter plot because it's created by dots that we plot on an x and y axis. So each dot is formed by a pair of x and y scores. In this example, I have x scores, which are a student's age, and y scores, which are the student's pulse rate. Let's see if there's a relationship between these two. The way that I would create a scatter plot by hand is work through each pair and plot it on my x and y axis, which then becomes the scatter plot. The x scores are, of course, on the x-axis or the horizontal axis. Y scores go on the y-axis. The x-axis is the predictor. We want to know what can we learn about pulse rate because of age. How does age predict pulse rate? So the predictor is going to go on the x-axis, and the criterion, or the outcome variable, is going to go on the y-axis. To create a dot, I would start with the first pair. The student's age is 20, and the pulse rate is 72. So I go over 20 and up to 72, and I put a dot. Then I take the next pair, 25 and 62. I go over 25, up 62, and put another dot. Then I do 35 on the x-axis and 86 on the y-axis. Put another dot. Over 45 and up 64, over 25 and up 76, over 40 and up 80, over 45 and up 74. That is how I complete those dots. So this is simple graphing that hopefully you remember from elementary or junior high school. This is a simple way of visualizing correlational data. So there's some things we need to know about scatter plots. Number one, you can only plot two variables at a time. Now it is possible to ask for multiple variables to be plotted, but the plots will always be created two at a time. It is a bivariate technique. Two variables, x and y. The data must be interval or ratio level. So we have to have that scale level data. If we have ordinal data or nominal categorical data, we can still do correlations, but we do them slightly differently, and we'll learn about those later. When the points on that scatter plot, all those dots are close to a straight line, we say there is a strong relationship. And the closer the dots are to the straight line, the stronger the relationship. But as the dots are different from or have more variability around the straight line, we say the relationship is weaker. Another way that you can tell the strength of the relationship from looking at a scatter plot is that as the slope of the line approaches 45 degrees, the correlation becomes stronger. So we're going to do a scatter plot in SPSS. In order to do this, we need a data set. So open up SPSS and get the data set jobsatisfaction.sav. The participants in this data set, this highly cleaned and anonymous data set, are 200 mental health counselors who have been measured on 4 variables. Actually more than this, but the 4 that we're going to look at are job satisfaction. How much do you like your job? Burnout. How much have you been affected by the daily grind of your job? And compassion fatigue. How much have you been affected by the negative emotional consequences of listening to the traumatic stories of the people that you are helping, who are your clients? Another variable that's been measured is gender, and we can use that to split our scatter plot later. Now in SPSS, we're going to create our scatter plot using the chart builder. The way that you access Chart Builder is by going to Graphs, Chart Builder, and then you're going to get a pop-up window. Before I show you that, I want to focus on one part of that window that's called the gallery. In the gallery, we choose a type of plot, in this case scatter or dot, and then we have, in this case, 8 options. The scatter plots that we're going to focus on are the simple scatter plot, the grouped scatter plot, and the scatter plot matrix. You can create other scatter plots, including 3D scatter plots, but here's a good rule. In APA style, there is no 3D. And generally, 3D graphs, while they may help in specific situations when you want to know something kind of in general about the way that data are interacting, they're not good for publication. So we're not going to use any 3D graphs, and the rest of the scatter plots have very specific applications. So we're going to focus on the most common scatter plots. Let's go over to SPSS and see how scatter plots can be created. We're going to create our scatter plot by using the chart builder. So to do this, we're going to go to Graphs, Chart Builder, and we'll get this dialog box. Now, in order for us to see these variable names a little bit better, I'd like to either right-click if you're on a PC or control-click if you're on a Mac and choose Display Variable Labels. Next, we need to decide what type of graph we want, and we want a scatter plot, which we'll find down here in the gallery, starting with scatter dot. Then we want a simple scatter plot. That's how we're going to begin. So our simple scatter plot, we click and drag up into the canvas, and now we're ready to place our X and Y values. We are interested in how well burnout predicts job satisfaction. So burnout is going to go on the X-axis, and job satisfaction is going to go on the Y-axis. We just click and drag those variables into place. And that is all we need to do to create this scatter plot. It's actually quite easy. So now let's click on OK. And here's our output. Scroll down a little bit. There we go. Now, I mentioned previously that we should put a regression line into our scatter plot, and what you'll see is no regression line. We need to add that. And the way that you will add a regression line is to start by double-clicking anywhere on the middle of this graph. There we go. It brings up what's called the chart editor, which gives us several options of things that we can do with our graph. We want to do something called add fit line at total. And that will get from some icons right here. This icon, if you hover over it, you'll see has a note that says add fit line at total. That's the one that we want. So I'm going to click on add fit line at total, and there it is. It got added for me. This is the chart editor, so what changes I make in here will appear on my actual chart. I think I'm done. So let's close the chart editor. And there's our regression line. It's been added to the scatter plot. Good. So let's then do a new type of graph. Let's split burnout and job satisfaction by gender. I wonder if males or females are more susceptible to burnout affecting their job satisfaction. To answer that question, I'm going to go back to my chart builder. I'm going to go to Graphs, Chart Builder, and notice I don't have to go back to the data set. I can just start from here. In order to make sure we're all on the same page and I haven't lost anyone, what I'd like you to do is click Reset, and let's start over. This time, instead of a simple scatter plot, we are going to use a grouped scatter plot. So drag group scatter plot up into the canvas, and we're going to put burnout, as we did before, on the X-axis and job satisfaction on the Y-axis. Again, if you want to see variable labels, you can right-click or control-click to get those variable labels. And remember, too, that the scatter plot that you see on your computer is not going to look like the scatter plot that I have here, because this is just a preliminary. It doesn't actually show us what the data are going to eventually look like. So there's one more thing that I want to know. Are males and females different in the way that burnout predicts job satisfaction? I'm going to split these data by gender. It's a categorical variable, and that gender is going to go on the set color box. And by set color, what it really means is that it's going to give us two colors, typically blue and green by default. So what do you want to set those two colors? We want gender to set the color. And that is all we need to do in order to run our scatter plot. Click OK. Our new scatter plot appears below the last one. All right. Well, what would be really helpful for interpreting these data? We might as well add a regression line. Except, do we want a single regression line? We already know what that's going to look like. We want a regression line for men and for women. By adding 2 regression lines, we can see whether they're mostly parallel or whether they go in different directions. That's going to tell us quite a bit. How do we get to the chart editor? We double-click on the chart. That opens up our chart editor, and instead of adding fit line at total, that would be a single fit line, we want to add a fit line at subgroups. Click. It adds our 2 lines. Close the chart editor. There are the lines. What we see is they're mostly parallel. In fact, they're very, very similar. So what we would say from that is that we're seeing the same pattern. There's one more type of scatter plot that I want to show you. Let's go to Graphs, Chart Builder. Let's click Reset. And this time, I want to show you how to create a scatter matrix. So we're going to choose the Scatterplot matrix, drag it into the canvas, and this time we're going to correlate job satisfaction, burnout, and compassion fatigue. Now what you'll notice is that there's not an X and Y axis here. It just says scatter matrix. What we want to do is put all 3 variables into this scatter matrix. Let's begin by choosing our variables. So we want job satisfaction, burnout, and compassion fatigue, or CF. In newer versions of SPSS, we can simply drag these variables into the scatter matrix one at a time. In older versions of SPSS, you may need to select them by holding down either a Shift key, or on the Mac, the Command key works for this, in order to drag all the variables in together. Let me show you that quickly, just in case you're having trouble with your SPSS. So, if you've already got your variables in, just watch. If not, if you're having trouble, here's a solution. I'm going to reset, put my scatter matrix back in there. In order to select these variables, I'm going to hold down on the Mac the Command key. So I'm going to grab job satisfaction. Oops, I got random ID as well. Job satisfaction, burnout, and compassion fatigue. Still holding down the Command key, I drag them all 3 into the scatter matrix. This may work using the Shift key on a PC. There may be another key. You'll have to experiment a little bit. But if you have a newer version of SPSS, you can just drag them in one at a time. So you should have all 3 variables in the scatter matrix. Let's click OK. And this is the output that we get. Before I interpret this output, I would like to go back to PowerPoint. Before we conclude with scatterplots, there's still one more thing. And that is, I want you to recognize the patterns that we see with these plots. Remember, it's just 2 variables, X and Y. And in the matrix scatterplot, all that's happened is that in one corner of the plot, they've switched the X and Y and put what was X on Y and what was Y on X. And therefore, when we look at the shape of these scatter plots, here's what you'll see. These scatter plots are the same. They're the same plot. They've just been rotated as the result of switching the X and Y axis. So the one in the upper right is the same plot as the one in the lower left. Now this theme is going to come back again as we look at correlation tables. There's going to come a point where I'll be creating a table that has quite a few blank cells in it. And the reason is because those cells would be filled by data that's exactly the same as what already exists. We can see that pattern here with the similarity of the scatter plots, and we'll see this same theme emerge again.